In a small town tucked away in the gentle hills of Indiana, where neighbors still wave from porches and Friday night football games draw the whole community together, there was a high school known for its exceptional standards and a reputation untarnished for decades. Jefferson High School, a place where parents proudly sent their children trusting in the integrity of its teachers, especially one man, Mr. David Harper. Mr. Harper was the kind of teacher students remembered long after graduation. He taught American literature like he was born to do it. Every line of Whitman or Dickinson rolled off his tongue with reverence, and his passion for the written word was infectious. He had a voice that resonated, a demeanor both stern and warm, and eyes that could lock in on you with a kind of silent understanding. He remembered birthdays. He stayed late to help students who were struggling. He ran the creative writing club and often brought in donuts from the local bakery. To most, he wasn't just a teacher. He was a mentor, a friend, a safe place, which is why no one questioned the private meetings he often had with certain students' office hours. He'd say, just extra help with essays. The blinds would be drawn in room 206, but that wasn't unusual. The sun glare was terrible in the afternoons. No one questioned when certain girls started improving their grades dramatically after just a few tutoring sessions. In a world filled with overworked teachers and forgotten students, Mr. Harper was simply a man who went above and beyond. Until one girl decided to speak. Her name was Emma Caldwell, 16 years old, new to town. The kind of girl who walked with her books pressed tightly to her chest and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Quiet observant. She had only been at Jefferson for a few months when Mr. Harper took an interest in her. He praised her essays in class, asked her to stay after for feedback. The first time he touched her, it was during one of these sessions, a hand on the shoulder that lingered too long, a comment about how mature she seemed, a joke that wasn't quite appropriate but delivered with a smile so practiced it felt harmless, almost charming. But it wasn't harmless. Over time, his suggestions grew bolder. Compliments turned into subtle propositions, praise turned into conditional approval, and eventually the line crossed, not just once but repeatedly. Emma was scared. More than that, she was ashamed. She believed, as so many do, that no one would believe her. After all, this was Mr. Harper. Everyone loved him. She would be seen as the troubled new girl trying to ruin a beloved man's career. So she stayed silent until something happened that she couldn't ignore. Another girl. Her name was Jenna Park 17. A junior who had been at Jefferson since freshman year. Jenna and Emma didn't talk much, but one day in the restroom, Emma overheard Jenna crying softly behind the stall door. And in that bathroom, surrounded by cracked tiles and echoing silence, the two girls began to share a secret neither had dared speak aloud before. Mr. Harper had touched them both, and they weren't alone. Emma made the decision that would change everything. She didn't go to the principal, she didn't trust the system. She wrote a letter. Not just a letter, but a story. A narrative of everything that had happened, every detail, every manipulation, every time she said no, but was made to feel like she couldn't leave. She submitted it anonymously to the school newspaper under the title The Man Behind the Mask. It wasn't explicit, names were changed, but anyone who had spent time in room 206 knew exactly who it was about. It spread like wildfire. And just like that, the walls around Mr. Harper began to crack. The school's administration tried to contain the fire, calling it a case of fictional storytelling taken out of proportion, but the damage was already done. Students whispered in hallways. Parents demanded answers. The school board held a closed-door meeting within 24 hours of the article's release. And then, just 2 days later, Jenna Park came forward, not anonymously, but publicly. She stood in front of the student body during morning announcements and read a prepared statement. Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "I know many of you won't believe me," she said. "And I know some of you will say, I just want attention. But I'm done being afraid. I'm done pretending nothing happened. Mr. Harper abused his position of power, and I was one of the girls he hurt." The silence that followed was unlike anything the school had ever known. The image of the perfect teacher began to dissolve. More girls came forward, first one, then another. A freshman who never told her parents, a senior who had graduated the year before and thought she had left it all behind. Each story was different, but the patterns were the same. Private meetings, late-night texts, study sessions that led to trauma. By the end of the week, there were 7 known victims, 7 brave young women who dared to break the silence. But what truly ignited the investigation wasn't just their testimonies, it was the evidence. One of the girls, Lily Thompson, a tech-savvy junior, had secretly recorded one of her tutoring sessions with Mr. Harper after feeling uncomfortable with his behavior. She hid her phone in her pencil pouch and pressed record. The audio file, nearly 40 minutes long, was damning. In it, Harper's voice is unmistakable, smooth, calculated, and dripping with manipulation. "You're not like the other girls, Lily," he says. "You're smarter, more aware. You understand how the world works. I see that in you." There's a pause. A nervous laugh from the girl. "I can help you get into any college you want. But you have to trust me. You have to let me guide you. No one else understands you like I do." The file ended with a sound that could only be described as a muffled protest and the sharp scraping of a chair. When Lily turned the file over to the school counselor, it was immediately passed to the local police. Detective Rachel Monroe was assigned to the case. She had seen plenty of predators try to hide behind respectability, but something about this case hit harder. Maybe it was the way the community had defended him for so long. Maybe it was because she had a daughter the same age as the girls Harper had preyed on. She moved fast. Subpoenas were issued. Harper's school-issued laptop and personal devices were confiscated. A warrant was served at his home. What they found sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Encrypted folders, dozens of them, some disguised as lesson plans, others labeled with years 2016, 2017, 2018. Inside were photos, videos, messages. Some of the images had been taken without the girls' knowledge. Others were clearly staged, but with girls who looked terrified, unsure, manipulated. Harper had built a digital shrine to his own corruption, carefully hidden behind firewalls and decoy files. He had even kept handwritten notes stored in a locked drawer in his home office. Pages and pages of what could only be described as psychological breakdowns of each student he targeted. Their insecurities, their dreams, their weaknesses. He didn't just prey on them, he studied them. When confronted, Harper denied everything, said the files were research, claimed the photos were misinterpreted, but the evidence was overwhelming, and soon the public pressure became too great to ignore. He was arrested at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning while sipping coffee on his front porch. The video of his arrest was broadcast that night on every local news channel. He wore his usual brown tweed jacket as if clinging to the persona of the harmless professor. But as officers led him away in handcuffs, the illusion was finally shattered. And for the girls he hurt, the ones who stayed silent, the ones who spoke justice, at last had a name. The arrest of David Harper sent shockwaves far beyond the quiet corners of Jefferson High. For decades, the town had seen itself as a haven, a slice of wholesome Americana, immune to the dark scandals they read about in the news. Now that illusion was shattered and the fallout came fast. Reporters descended on the town satellite trucks lined the street outside the school. Former students began posting cryptic messages on social media. The phrase Room 206 trended for 3 days in the state. Everyone, it seemed, had a theory, a suspicion, a story. Inside the school, the atmosphere grew tense. Teachers who had once shared lunch with Harper now avoided even speaking his name. Students looked over their shoulders, questioning who knew what and for how long. Principal Gail Morton held a press conference, visibly shaken, her voice cracking as she admitted the school had failed to recognize signs that in hindsight seemed painfully obvious. In the wake of the arrest, the police continued their investigation. Forensic analysts combed through Harper's devices, uncovering more data, hidden folders within hidden folders. The true number of victims was growing, and the timeline stretched back over 10 years. Some of the files included scans of old report cards, photos from yearbooks, handwritten notes passed in class. Harper had cataloged everything. It was as if he had prepared for the day he might be caught, but still couldn't stop himself. Detective Monroe knew what this meant. Harper wasn't just a predator. He was methodical, obsessive, and incredibly dangerous. She reached out to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. This wasn't just a case of abuse. This was long-term psychological grooming on a scale few had seen in a public school setting. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office began preparing the case for trial. Assistant DA Thomas Kravitz was brought in from Indianapolis. Known for his tireless preparation and fiery courtroom presence, Kravitz believed this was more than just a local scandal. This case, he told reporters, is about trust. About the sacred bond between teacher and student and what happens when that bond is weaponized. Harper's defense attorney tried to argue that the media frenzy had poisoned public opinion, that his client deserved a change of venue, but the judge, after reviewing the mountain of evidence, denied the motion. Let the trial take place here, he ruled, where the damage was done. And so it began. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Former students, parents, media, even teachers from other districts all showed up to witness the proceedings. Harper entered in a navy blue suit, clean-shaven. His expression calm, too. Calm, many would later say. He sat down, flanked by lawyers, and stared straight ahead. One by one, the survivors took the stand. Emma went first. The courtroom fell into a hush as she walked to the witness box. She wore a simple cardigan, her voice soft but unwavering. She described how Harper had made her feel special at first, how he had praised her writing, offered to help with college applications, even told her she had an old soul. But it didn't take long before the compliments turned into suggestive comments, then into touches, then pressure. Emma choked up only once when describing the guilt she carried for not speaking up sooner. I thought, maybe I let it happen. Maybe it was my fault, but now I know it wasn't. It was his plan from the start. Then came Jenna and Lily, and a dozen more. Each story chipped away at the image Harper had spent decades building. One girl recalled how Harper invited her to his house to review poetry submissions for a school magazine, only to lock the door behind her. Another testified that he had threatened to fail her if she didn't relax during a tutoring session. Some had photos, some had text messages, all had scars. Kravitz, the prosecutor, built the case like an architect. Every detail, every timeline, every piece of digital evidence perfectly placed. The jury sat stone-faced as audio clips played in the courtroom. Whispered conversations, harsh laughter, the sound of trust breaking. But the most damning testimony came not from a student, but from a fellow teacher, Miss Dana Riley. She had worked with Harper for over 15 years. She had admired his classroom control, his eloquence, but in recent years, she said something began to feel off. She noticed how he always chose the same kind of student for mentorship. Quiet girls, often from unstable homes or dealing with personal struggles. She had even raised her concerns once with a vice principal, but was told Harper was too respected for such rumors. "I should have pushed harder," she said on the stand, her voice cracking. "I should have done more." When the defense rose to cross-examine, their tone was calculated, soft, respectful. They tried to cast doubt, hint at memory flaws, suggest exaggerations. But the jury saw through it. The evidence was too strong, the patterns too consistent. Harper himself refused to testify. He sat in silence throughout the entire trial, scribbling notes to his lawyers, never once looking at the witnesses. The trial lasted 12 days. On the 13th, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. And when they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all 36 counts. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Survivors were given the chance to speak not as witnesses, but as voices, as people. Emma stood again, this time stronger. She wore the same cardigan, not by coincidence, but by choice, a quiet symbol of how far she had come. She looked Harper in the eye and said, "You thought you broke me, but I was never yours to break." One by one, others followed. Some read statements, some cried, some couldn't speak at all, and their letters were read by advocates. The courtroom wasn't silent. It breathed with grief, rage, relief. A collective exhale from a community finally facing the monster that had lived among them. The judge, a gray-haired man with decades on the bench, took a long pause before delivering the sentence. He looked directly at Harper and said, "You weaponized trust. You poisoned a place meant to be safe, and you built an empire of fear using the minds and bodies of children." Harper was sentenced to 165 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with tears. It wasn't celebration, it was release, it was justice. News of the trial swept the nation. Harper became a name synonymous with betrayal. Several schools across the country launched internal reviews of teacher-student interactions. State legislators proposed new oversight measures for school staff. Social media exploded with messages of support for the survivors. But while the public watched from afar, the healing within Jefferson was slower, quieter. Room 206 was shut down permanently. The blinds stayed drawn, the walls were repainted. A guidance counselor was moved into the space, and a plaque was quietly installed just outside the door, for every voice that found the courage to speak, for every silence broken. Emma graduated that spring, walking across the stage to a standing ovation. Not because of her grades, not because of awards, but because she stood up when it cost the most and changed everything. She went on to study psychology, hoping to one day help young people who felt as lost and scared as she once did. Jenna received a full scholarship to a university that had read about her bravery in the papers. Lily became a digital forensics expert, dedicating her career to catching people who use screens to hide secrets. And the town, though scarred, did something few expected. It grew wiser. The school implemented new policies. Cameras were installed in every classroom. One-on-one tutoring was now held only in glass-walled rooms. A new hotline was created, staffed by trained crisis counselors. Teachers received annual training not just in academics, but in trauma awareness and ethical conduct. There was no going back to how things were, but maybe that was the point. Because justice isn't about restoring the past, it's about reshaping the future. And for every Emma still sitting in silence somewhere out there, that future matters. One of the most profound lessons from the story is the power and danger of misplaced trust. David Harper wasn't a stranger in the alley. He was a respected figure in the community, someone parents trusted, students admired, and colleagues defended. It reminds us that evil doesn't always come wearing a mask. Sometimes it smiles, teaches poetry, and brings donuts to class. Another powerful message is that silence can be the accomplice of abuse. For years, Harper thrived not just because of his manipulation, but because of the culture of disbelief, the idea that someone like him would never do that. This false assumption allowed the harm to fester in silence. But perhaps the most uplifting message is the resilience of truth and the courage it takes to speak it. Emma, Jenna, and the other survivors didn't just expose a predator. They reshaped an entire system, made space for future voices, and proved that even in the darkest places, light can get in. In life, we must remain vigilant, not paranoid, but aware. We must create spaces where young people feel safe to speak and where authority is held accountable, no matter how beloved or respected. And above all, we must teach that telling the truth, even when it shakes the ground beneath us, is one of the most powerful acts a person can do.